you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for for letting me talk more about older people. I think these sessions are really, really useful because as a researcher, most of my time has been spent learning on the job and reading a lot of papers to try and figure out how other people have done it. So these are really, really useful sessions to learn from other people. So just a little bit about me. So I'm the founder of Insights for Innovation. So I do mentoring and coaching for businesses, and also I'm a consultant at a strategic level for innovation, R&D, business, product marketing, but really with feedback at the core from customers and users. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn or connect, there's my hashtag, well, whatever you call it on LinkedIn. Okay, so what I want to do is take a storytelling approach to this, because each one is so different. So what I wanted to do is give some feedback on, well, to give some context as to what each study was about, the context, so the research methodology that I used, and also some tips. But just before I launch into that, I just want to tell you a bit more about my background. So I've been doing research for over 10 years, probably going on sort of 12, 13 years across user research, market research, social and evaluation. So research has been a real passion of mine throughout my career. And when it comes to older people and doing research with older people, there's no real definition as to how do we necessarily define an older person, but there is kind of some indications in the literature that older people can be grouped based on different levels of age. So young old, which is 65 to 74 years old, middle old, 75 to 84, and old, which is 85 years old and upward. So the different examples I'm going to give today, the different case studies that I'm going to go through, they go through lots of, well, I think each of those different age brackets. So in terms of how we defined who we're going to include in these studies, it was based on whether there were a particular group that used a certain service or product. So it wasn't necessarily about their age. So we wanted to understand if they had any particular needs, if that particular product or service was meeting their needs. So I kind of have my, evaluative research hat on, as well as my user research hat on in certain research studies. Okay, so this first one is my my PhD study. So this looked at organ donation, gift exchange theory, and religion. So quite heavy topics. So it's kind of looking at how they kind of came together, but more from a Polish migrant perspective. And this was back in 2008, 2009. What we were really interested in is learning more about how people from the Polish community viewed organ donation, because not very much was known about that at the time. And there was a big influx of Polish migrants coming into the UK after 2004, but also we had the post-war group here as well. So in this particular piece of research, it was kind of quite complex because I had to talk to people whose English wasn't their first language, very sensitive topics, and also trying to access the Polish community took a really long time. So I did work with a translator who was amazing. She was very flexible, and she was available at the weekends when we had to turn up at the local church, and just randomly had cups of tea with a priest to kind of build that relationship. So a lot of effort went into making the community feel very comfortable with us before we started to invite them into the research. But the community, the gatekeepers in the community, so in this case the priests, they were very supportive of the research, so that really helped. So with this particular piece of research, it was looking at what the views of Polish migrants were of organ donation and accessing organ donation services in the UK. So what we were interested in here is the influence of older people's views in that community towards organ donation. So with the particular age group of people who we were talking to, which are post-war, these participants were in their 80s and 90s, and this was in-person research at the time. So we were invited into their homes, made sure that we were DBS checked and everything, just to make, because they're very vulnerable, and also ensure that they were with carers or family members, just so they felt safe. And if they started to feel tired, those kind of indications that we needed to maybe take a break or stop, they help with that. Yeah, so in terms of recruiting this particular age group or this particular community, it was through building a lot of trust over weeks and months to engage with this community and to explain why we needed to do this piece of research, and to invite in person these particular participants to see if it would be possible for us to come and have a chat with them about organ donation. So that's kind of how we went around recruitment, because it was such a specific group of people that we're interested in. So in terms of tips for this one, because they were in their 80s and 90s, they got tired very quickly. So what we did is we shortened the interview guide down to the absolute core questions, because the focus kind of went, after about 20 minutes, half an hour. So just kind of wanted to make it really informal, friendly, but very concise in terms of the questions. And also they were so sweet. This community was so lovely. A lot of the time they wanted us to stay for a chat. So myself and the interpreter went to do these interviews, and they wanted us to stay for a cup of tea. So if you're doing research with older people in their homes, then allow a bit of extra time to stay for an extra, to stay for a chat, because sometimes I haven't seen people for a while, and also when it comes to the incentives, to kind of consider alternative incentives. So in this case, we didn't want to give a high street voucher or an Amazon voucher or anything, because it wasn't really relevant. So what we did is we offered a contribution towards the paint for painting their community hall. So we kind of thought about the incentive and what was really relevant for this particular group. Okay, so the next one is, this was a winter wellness project, and this was evaluating a programme for a London borough. So they had a charity that was providing services. So it was maintenance services where they had local services kind of going into people's homes to kind of fix windows and all these kind of things, as well as being a connection between, I guess, charities like Age UK and these kind of vulnerable people, and accessing the different communities that are available locally. So this winter wellness programme was about keeping them warm and safe, but also part of a community, and keeping them kind of socialised throughout the winter period. So in terms of this one, this was looking at, was this service meeting their needs? So it's kind of looking at more service design kind of type of evaluative research. So for this one, I did interviews again, and again, it was in people's homes. And because it was through a charity, the recruitment side was quite straightforward, because it was only the users of that particular service delivered by that charity that I needed to go and talk to. But yeah, they were very vulnerable people, and yeah, I just made sure that they felt as comfortable as possible. So I gave many reminders, so they knew that I was, the day was coming when I was going to come and see them. And also I called them when I was on my way, just so they knew to expect me to kind of turn up on their doorstep in the next sort of hour. So kind of really thinking about trying to reduce anxiety as much as possible, just in case they forgot. and it caused an anxiety or something. And also what I did is I bought refreshments. So I had a whole array of cakes that I brought with me that they could choose from, and tea and things, because I wanted to make them feel just as comfortable as possible. And again, they wanted me to stay for a chat. So we usually had a chat at the beginning, and then, asked them some questions, but made it feel like a conversation rather than, a scripted interview guide. But yeah, they're very, very sweet. There were a couple of cases where the maintenance service hadn't quite done what they needed to do. So there was a couple of people whose windows they were causing drafts and, things like that. So it just meant that I felt responsible I thought it was my place really to kind of flag these things up to make sure that those issues were dealt with. So if you see something that's not quite right, if you're kind of in this certain circumstance, I think it's important to, to flag these things up. Also, it's not sort of necessarily relating to this situation, but I think if you are to expect older people to come and travel to see you, in this case I was coming to see them, but to pay for their travel costs up front as well, just sort of on a side note on that one. Okay, so the next one was with the same London borough, but this one was it was quite interesting. I thought, how am I going to explain predictive analytics to older people who might not fully understand kind of what that kind of means in their perception of AI and things. And I thought I don't want to go down a rabbit hole in terms of AI and concerns about I just wanted to stay on topic. So what I did is I came up with an engaging way of doing this, sort of using a lot of visual aids, but just kind of backtracking a little bit. With adult social care users, we were just very specific about who we wanted to recruit in this particular study. So we had to go through the London Borough's group of charities and third parties. So I couldn't contact anyone outside of that particular borough and their partners. So this made the recruitment a really long process. It took weeks to ask a certain person to, maybe put something out on social media if we're able to kind of do that, or to kind of reach out to certain charities or certain organizations that they worked with, because we needed to target this very, very specific user group. In the end, we did get all the users that we needed. So we used a focus group approach, and again, bought lots of cakes and fruit and all that kind of stuff when I went to these particular venues. So it meant that when I needed to go and speak to these service users, they were usually in very sort of specific places, so like a certain house that they might live in or something. Yeah, it was really interesting, because what the borough were trying to do was take adult social care records and connect these with wider electronic health records. So it was kind of looking at their perceptions as to what they thought about that, and if they would be on board with it, if there'd be any concerns or things like that. So it was really important to this particular London borough that they had engaged these particular service users when they're looking at doing kind of things with their records and linking them with GP records as well. So in terms of the age group, these were kind of more middle-old in terms of the age group we were tackling. So they were kind of over 65, between sort of 75 and 80. So they were sort of older adult social care users. So sort of learning from my PhD studies and keeping the questions short and trying to keep the conversation very, very succinct, applied that here. But also, I wanted to make the idea of predictive analytics as simple as possible. So I used a lot of post-it notes and kind of looked at, this is actually what's on your GP health record, and kind of broke down those pieces. Then they could see it in front of them, and then kind of broke down what was on their adult social care record. And, they wanted to kind of combine them. And what did they think of these pieces of information coming together? So I tried to kind of use methods that were quite engaging and had visual aids to kind of prompt different conversations, because I didn't want things to be too abstract or kind of conceptual, or having to hold lots of information, in their heads whilst we were kind of talking about quite complex, in-depth topics. Yeah, so in terms of tips, if you're kind of looking at complex ideas, kind of breaking them down into their simplest form and using visual aids and making things as interactive and as fun as possible is something that I would really recommend. And if you are working with the public sector, when it comes to the contract side of things, add an extra 3 to 6 months to the end of the contract than what you thought it might actually take, just to avoid having to do contract extensions and things like that, because the recruitment can just take such a long time. And also with the group that I was talking to, sometimes they kind of lost focus or kind of lost interest a little bit. I think one person kind of fell asleep, so it was just like trying to keep people involved and on topic kind of gently, if they wanted to get involved, but not, if they don't want to, that's totally fine. Not kind of, no one's obliged. So it's just kind of just reiterating that this is voluntary and there's no obligation to continue with a chat or focus group or anything like that. So they have got the right to withdraw at any time. And then the last one is quite similar to what Bio was talking about, actually. So kind of doing usability testing on a website. I know it wasn't like exactly the same, but what we did for this one was this particular charity had a number of different digital services available. So they had a chatbot, an online community, a website, and there was also lots of information and different ways of contacting them. So what they were interested in is, can they get from one digital service to another if they were looking for certain pieces of information? So it was all about how they would navigate the website and how they would jump from one digital service to another. So what we did is we made it more goal orientated. So we did more kind of a task analysis. So we made it quite high level and just kind of said, can you find out about this particular medication or the effects of this medication, or looking at exercises for, if you have arthritis in your hand. So we made it very, very specific as to what we wanted them to find. And we started off at Google just to kind of see how they ended up on the page and what the search terms were and things. So this group was, their typical user was over 57, but those that ended up getting involved were in their 60s. So in terms of recruiting for this particular project, it was actually quite difficult. I mean, they had a lot of members of their charity available, but I think because they had lots of research happening at the same time, they didn't want to keep putting requests out onto social media about getting involved in different types of research. We used a pop-up on the website. That didn't work. Also, there was volunteers who were interested in taking part in research. So we reached out to all of them and we didn't get very much of a response. So the way that we overcame that was we used social media. So I went into Facebook and kind of just reached out to lots of different local groups just to see if there'll be anyone who had arthritis. We had very specific inclusion criteria, just to see if there'd be anyone that would be interested. And luckily there was, and with the snowball effect, we soon got the number of participants that we needed that fit that particular inclusion criteria. So in terms of the tips for this research, so yeah, it was online testing with interviews as well. So we used a kind of a similar idea to Via's like lessons, I think. So we found that it was kind of a bit overwhelming for them to kind of think about having a website to go through and looking at how to navigate Zoom and how they'd share their screen and everything. So what we did is I controlled the website, and then I asked them to tell me where to click, what to put in, and to kind of tell me how I would do everything. So they were teaching me how they would navigate this particular website and go through these different services and how they would tackle that. So just in terms of the lessons learned on that, first of all, I would offer run-throughs so they don't worry about coming to the time or to the event or the interview kind of thinking, oh no, I don't know how to get onto it. So I gave them about 15 minutes before the session to get logged on and to kind of get used to screen sharing. And I also offered them a separate session if they wanted to do this for a longer period of time, just to kind of get used to it. Also with arthritis and also the other topics that I've researched in the past, so like with organ donation and being part of the adult social care system and things, it can prompt some very sensitive topics and very emotional stories to come up, which we have to kind of keep them on topic, because we kind of have to think about our emotional load and what's relevant to talk about, etc. But if you do end up having those really difficult stories to hear, it's just making sure that you do look after yourself and that you have someone to talk to about these different topics as well. And yeah, just kind of giving them space to feel really comfortable, a bit like those in-person sessions, but trying to replicate that online as much as possible. Okay, so in terms of my key takeaways, just to kind of put them in a list here. So have fewer questions. They can get tired after half an hour or so. If you're doing online research, offer them some time to run through the technology before you start. If you do in person, maybe bring some refreshments, or even send them something before the session if you kind of wanted them to have something at home. But there's GDPR and personal information and all that kind of thing, so that might not be relevant in some cases. Yeah, stick around for a chat, even if that's online, because if someone's shared something very sensitive, then it's good to kind of make them feel comfortable after, just kind of have a chat, just to kind of make sure that they're okay, and also preempt these sensitive topics coming up as well. So then you're able to signpost people to different services. Yeah, allow for disinterest and gently steering people back onto topic. Expect to create relationships with gatekeepers, and that might take a lot longer than you'd expect. Yeah, and same with working with the public sector. Timings might take much longer than you expect. Yeah, if you are working with vulnerable people, maybe flag up something if you're working in the public sector. Provide reminders as much as you can, so then they know that you're on your way, or they need to log on now. Offer transport costs if you're expecting people to travel to you. Think about the incentives. Sometimes they're not going to be completely relevant. If it's an Amazon voucher or a high street voucher, there might be something else, like a donation to charity, for example. If they want to, maybe invite them to bring a carer or a family member to join them, offer them lots of breaks, allow the carer or prompt the carer to kind of, you know, tell us when they need a break. Use visual aids to stimulate discussions, just to kind of make it engaging and fun. So these are just very brief reflections. So be really patient, make people feel as comfortable as possible and not rushed in any way. Look after yourself if any sensitive topics come up, and also have a feedback loop in place, which is a tip that I should have put earlier. But have a feedback loop in place, so then those people that have been involved in your research, they know what the impact of their time and insights were on your particular project. So sometimes I do a one-pager to kind of give a bit of a background and, you know, a few bullet points as to the key findings and how it actually improved or had an effect on something. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much for listening.